Currently, as executive principal designer, Tom now leads a team that continues to build design tools at InVision. Please welcome Tom to the Hang Time stage.
Here to talk to you today about animation. Not animation, we're not going to get into tweening and the technical side of animating, but I wanted to talk to you about why we should be using animation as user experience designers. But before we dive into that, I want to give you a really brief history of animation, how we got to where we are today. I know you're all probably thinking that I'm going to show Walt Disney next, right? But the history of animation actually begins with flying horses. Back in the early 1800s, there was an ongoing debate about what horses looked like when they were mid-gallop, right? And the prevailing thought was that horses kind of sprawled themselves out like this and flew across the landscape as they were running. Then there was this photographer, Edward Muybridge, who decided that he was going to try to crack this. He was going to find a way to capture a horse in gallop, right? Now, as he set out to do this work, he ended up in a bit of an accident. He fell off a stagecoach and bonked his head. And ever since that moment, his friends and family thought he was a little bit, let's call it, insane. And so insane, in fact, that when he found out that his wife was cheating on him, probably because he was insane, he hunted him down, shot and killed him. He was arrested and tried for murder, and he pled insanity. However, the judge threw out the insanity plea and basically acquitted him anyways because they thought that it was a justifiable homicide. So imagine that. Back in the 1800s, if somebody cheated on you, you just go shoot them. No big deal. Anyways, later that year, he had a technological breakthrough. He was able to capture this horse in gallop. And what he did is he set up this long line of cameras, and as the horse ran by, he captured it across all of those different cameras. And alongside that, he also invented what was called the zoopraxiscope. I think that's what it's called, which was a device where you could put this little wheel in with all those images and spin it, right? And he basically invented the motion picture. This is a pretty big deal. Now, it was still crazy old Muybridge, so he used these tools to do some weird stuff, right? I don't know how he convinced these two to take their clothes off and swing sledgehammers at each other, but he did, and there's a lot of other weird ones. You should take a look at them. But this basically set the stage for other animators to come around. Here's where we get to Disney, right? So Walt Disney used some of those same techniques to create motion pictures. And basically, it created an entire industry, right? And by the 50s or 60s, Disney had become like a master of animation. If you look at this Cinderella, like the way that her bun flips up and the sparkles that are swirling and moving up on top of her, that is like absolutely beautiful animation. And they had to do that by hand, frame by frame. It's incredible. They got so good at animation that they literally wrote the book on it. This is called The Illusion of Life. It's a great book on how you can use animation appropriately. And if you look at where we're at today, the animated films that we see, it's really, really incredible, right? We have completely mastered animation. There's no doubt about it. Look at that. That thing looks awesome. But then, in the 90s, something happened with animation. And we got a weird selection thing going on. I don't know if you guys can click out of that. Right? We gave these really powerful tools. We gave really powerful tools to the wrong people. And we said, just add a bunch of animation. We didn't understand this medium, right? And that's the reason I'm here today. I want to help us understand this medium and how we can use animation on the screen to like enhance user experiences. So my name's Tom Giannattasio. I'm at Attassi most places on the web. And there's been so much incredibly inspiring work shown up here on the stage, and I'm going to show you the exact opposite. This is a Flash intro that I designed back in the early 90s to a very popular website that you probably have visited. This was Tom's Punk skate page. Wait for it. There's your nav, okay? Eat your heart out, David Carson. But this is, like many others, this is how I got started in animation. Flash was an incredible tool. And I spent a good 10, 15 years using Flash doing animation work. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I started doing some work with Apple, and I moved into the tooling space. And I started building creative authoring tools that allowed people to do animation and other design things. And so I helped them build some animation modules and things for the iAd platform, iTunes, and iBooks. A few years later, I founded a company called Macaw, and we built responsive web design software. And then that was acquired by InVision about 3 years ago. And my time at InVision has been spent mostly on a tool called InVision Studio, which is like a design and animation tool all in one. And it kind of marries it into like a nice seamless workflow so that you can add animation and think about that as part of the user experience while you're designing your screens. And in all of that time, over my couple decades of working with animation and now building tools so other people can do animation, I've learned a lot about what works, what doesn't work. And so what I've done is I've compiled a number of intents and patterns that I think are incredibly effective in enhancing the user experience, right? Using animation to make things better and not just to do something really cool. So I'd like to walk through these with you now. So animation is an incredible storytelling tool. And so using animation to explain complex subjects is a really, really effective way to do it when images and text simply won't do. So if we take a look at this sequence, right, we see this simple card that starts at the top. We'll wait for it to reset. Then these 4 cards come together into one. Then it goes down, and it slides through this machine, and it syncs to your phone. And in about 5 seconds, I grasped what's sort of a really new concept of putting all these things into one. And it would have taken much longer for me to actually read through that. So animation was really, really effective in telling that story very quickly. Another pattern that you often see is just supplementing the material after the user has shown some interest in a certain thing, right? So on hover, you sort of animate some things onto the screen to tell a deeper story about something that the user has shown that they're interested about. One of the most powerful ways to use animation, in my opinion, especially when designing apps, is to use it to acquaint people with the architecture of the application so they don't get kind of lost in these static screens jumping from one to another. So if we take a look at this transition technique of as you're going to this, like, first you're in a card view, you can kind of swipe, then that slides open to get a little bit more detail, and it moves up to get like the full details on that. If you had just simply tapped and moved between those screens, it'd be pretty disorienting. You wouldn't understand how things connected through that architecture of that experience. So it could be a really effective way of bringing that together for people without them losing context. Now here's a tricky design problem, right? What they want to do on here is show a stacked navigation as an overall menu, right? So it's vertical. But once you tap into one of those things, like, you kind of want to move to a horizontal navigation scheme because it doesn't work vertically anymore. So what they're doing is they're using animation to connect those 2 different screens so you understand how everything works. So they kind of shuffle over to the sides, and you know, like, oh, it's over there on the right. Even though I can't see it, I know how to get to it. It's enhancing the user experience. It's not really just a gimmick or anything. Zoom is something very popular. You know, I don't know how many times I zoom through the Pinterest app and get lost in this rabbit hole. But it's a really effective pattern when you don't want people to lose context with what they were doing, right? You don't want them to fully task switch. You just want them to get a little more context. So just pop it and zoom it in, let them zoom back out. Again, you've connected things there, and they're still acquainted with the architecture. The reveal pattern is something that we see in pretty much every application, right? You know something's tucked down there. All you have to do is slide it back up. You always know how to get out. It's your escape hatch. And this is a really unique technique that may not work in all circumstances, but is super effective here. They're using a perspective shift here that when you're looking at this movie details, and you've got this picture at the top of the Martian, and then when you go to actually pick seats for the movie, they use that and they rotate it on the x-axis down, and it becomes the screen in front of those seats, which is really important. It's not just a gimmick here either, because if you just saw that with those squares, you'd be like, where the hell's the front of this thing? I don't know if I'm getting seats in the front or the back. There's like extra data encapsulated in that animation that makes it really, really effective. Obviously, animation is all about changing things, and it's super effective on interface design as well. So if we have something, this is a very common pattern, right? Like, you want to add something, so you start with a plus. And then once you open that menu, it changes to an X. Self-explanatory, but it helps you understand that these things are connected, and you don't have to shift the icons. It's an easy little trick to change the meaning behind the iconography in the system. Toggling is sometimes really hard. If you just want to show one icon, and you don't know how to represent the toggle. Sometimes it's hard to know as a user if it's on or if it's off. And what happens when you click? Do you turn it on or turn it off? But adding some animation into that experience helps people understand and kind of clarify, I'm actually turning this on. You guys remember starring tweets? Indicate. Animation is so powerful in like communicating that something is going on inside of a system. So if we look at this, this music player by Gleb, who just crushes pretty much everything he touches, we can see that this is actually playing, right? You know that it's playing because you got these wavelengths moving here. So the animation is communicating that to you in ways that a static pause icon may not, right? It's pause. Hold on, that's kind of like the opposite of what's going on here. Animation obviously calls attention, right? It can distract people from what they're doing, and you can use that to your advantage by presenting them with things that animate if there's an urgent need for them to take action, right? Like a phone call. And notifications. There's a really good reason to animate notifications onto the screen, and it's because if you don't animate things onto the screen, you're giving people roughly 16 milliseconds to perceive a change in the screen, right? Now, if they're not paying attention really, really well during that 16 millisecond time frame, then they're going to miss what happened. Or they might see that something happened, but they're not sure what it was. So when you stretch time out and say, we're going to use a second to animate this thing onto the screen, it's not some superficial animation. It's actually really effective in enlarging that time for them to understand that something is changing in the system. And it can also be used to make more efficient interfaces, right? You guys remember that giant button on the iPhone with the big S arrow they had to slide over? You don't have to have that many interface elements. You can remove those by doing subtle little hints with animation, right? So this little shimmer communicates enough to you that, like, oh, all I got to do is, like, slide that sucker over, and I'll get into, or open the door in this case. And, of course, progress. I think we all understand that. But the important thing here is that it's helping you understand that the system is actually doing action, right? So just showing loading doesn't help anybody. You've got to show some progress. Let them know that things are actually working. And here's where it starts to get a little gray. Animation can be used to convey certain brand characteristics or qualities. This example of the Uber application, just as you're loading it up, drops a pin, kind of does this 3D animation into where you're at. They didn't have to do that, right? But it sets the brand tone for everything that's going on there, and it adds a sense of luxury, like, damn, this app is, like, sweet. So use that carefully. Obviously, you can't just animate everything because that's your brand presence, but it can be really effective in communicating a certain emotion for people. Make something really fun by, as you scroll, little things jiggle. That's cool. We're just adding some ambiance, right? I think everybody's put a full screen video behind their app. And it can be used to entertain, obviously. I don't know what's exactly going on there. But it is pretty funny. This is, I think, one of the best examples of using an animation to entertain, and not just entertain, but also to, like, build rapport with someone. So this is from MailChimp, right? So I'm sure some of you have seen this before. And right as you're about to send an email to 50,000 subscribers, like, that's like a tense moment. So they added this animation in there that's like, yo, we get it. We understand what you're going through. Everything's going to be fine. It's a really, really effective way to build that closer relationship with the user. And it can help you occupy people when the system is in a state of, like, downtime or heavy processing. Right? There's a reason that the little spinner icon on the Mac is this little ball that kind of rotates around. It's literally trying to hypnotize you so you don't realize that things are taking forever. Right? So building little loading states that fill in the gaps and keep people entertained and occupied while the system is working is a really important thing to do. I hesitate to use this word because I think it gets a little overused, but you can delight your users with little surprises, right? This isn't an excuse to animate all the things, but it is, if you use it effectively and stick it in little spots, like this little pull-down animation, I think is really smart because it's one of those times where, again, you're trying to occupy the user while they're waiting for things to refresh. And it's like this little Easter egg that's hidden in the app that once you find it, you're like, damn, this is pretty cool. Like, I should go tell people. It's also like a viral kind of thing. And of course, it can just add this sense of polish and craftsmanship to an interface. Things just feel nicer if they nice and easily transition across things. You have these little effects. It can feel really, really nice and add that craftsmanship so people build stronger associations with you and your brand. And animation can be extremely engaging and interactive. I think Apple does this really, really well on the Apple TV, where you've got that little thumb pad, and you just want to play with those little cards a little bit. It seems weird. At first, I thought it was sort of gimmicky, but then I sort of realized that, I think the reason they're doing that is because normally interacting with a television, you're pushing these big, clunky-ass buttons, and it's just a really, really awkward experience where you just jump to the next screen. But here's something so fluid and interactive that, you get pulled into the interface, and it's something that you just never experienced before. And people are going to fiddle. If you let them fiddle, they will fiddle. Now, this is all a little bit dangerous because I feel like some of those might be reasons why you should just go full Minority Report in your app and just build all this cool, crazy shit. And Hollywood wants us to believe that these are the interfaces we'll be using in the future, right? Like, oh man, look at all these rotating spheres. What the hell is that thing in the upper right-hand corner? If that's how you have to fly a spaceship in the future, I don't want to live in the future. Look at that. That thing is beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. But if that's like the interface that Trump has to launch the nuclear missiles, he's going to hit the wrong button. So I guess what I would like to leave you with this is think about the intent when you move to animation. Definitely use it because it can enhance a user experience in really, really effective ways. But think about what the intent of that animation actually is. Here's one more I'll leave you with. Just to haunt your dreams tonight. God, that's creepy. Anyways, thank you so much. My slides are online at giannattasio.com/motion. And if you take a little picture of that, our friends at InVision will send you an animation handbook that you should definitely check out. So thank you so much.